Have you ever, hit post on a comment? Maybe you're sharing a personal story or even just a sharp joke, and instantly, almost before your finger even leaves the screen, it's flagged and removed.
Oh, yeah, it's that immediate little red warning label.
Exactly. You're sitting there staring at it, realizing the algorithm didn't just miss your point, it completely missed your humanity?
Right, it categorized you as a threat when you were literally just trying to be heard.
Yeah. And today, we are figuring out exactly why that happens. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's a phenomenon that's becoming, honestly, incredibly common as our digital spaces grow. And the materials we're looking at today dissect this from a few different, really compelling angles.
Right. Our stack today is a great mix. We've got this deeply philosophical monologue called The Amputation of Context,
Yeah.
an analytical academic paper titled The Right to be Read Whole.
And this one is fascinating, a literal transcript of a real-world automated system trying to moderate a creative presentation.
Yes, that one is titled Creative Pathways. So the mission today is to explore this hidden crisis. What actually happens to human expression when we hand over the authority of interpretation to machines that fundamentally only know how to classify?
Exactly. We're exploring the argument that the very systems designed to keep platforms safe might actually be silencing the people who need their voices the most.
And to really ground that, I think we should probably start with that Creative Pathways transcript, right?
Oh, 100%. It moves the conversation out of the theoretical and into a very tangible and highly ironic example of an automated system spectacularly misunderstanding a human being.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the transcript details a creator who is trying to put together a slide presentation. And this isn't, just a corporate quarterly review.
No, not at all.
It's a creative artistic project focusing on human dignity and the history of marginalized groups fighting for their rights.
Right. It's a very visceral historical piece.
Yeah. And the presentation contains phrases describing actual historical events. For example, they use the phrase, homosexuals showed up with fabric and audacity.
Which is a great line.
It is. And later, there's a mention of throwing furniture in the context of historical protests.
And almost immediately, the automated system steps in and just blocks the whole presentation.
Wait, immediately?
Yeah, instantly.
Yeah.
It flags words like gay and homosexuals, and it treats literal transcripts of historical pushback like throwing furniture as offensive or dangerous content that violates safety guidelines.
I mean, the irony there is just thick.
It really is.
You have a creative work specifically about marginalized groups being historically mislabeled by society, about them fighting back against harmful categorization, and it gets blocked and mislabeled by the very machine it is describing.
It's almost poetic in the worst way possible.
Totally. But, okay, looking at this objectively, from the perspective of a platform that processes, billions of interactions a day, aren't these systems just doing exactly what they are programmed to do?
Oh, yeah.
They are built to scan for words associated with violence, like throwing, or sensitive identity terms that are unfortunately often used as slurs.
Right.
They flag them to prevent harm at a massive scale. I mean, isn't that just a necessary basic safety mechanism?
What's fascinating here is that that's the exact tension the academic paper The Right to be Read Whole addresses. The paper points out a fundamental flaw in that logic.
Okay, what's the flaw?
Well, when a system operates primarily as a blind labeling machine, it isolates specific words and completely strips them of their artistic, historical, or even moral context.
So it just sees the word and nothing else.
Exactly. It takes a visceral, deeply human demand for universal dignity and reduces it to what the text calls a sterile category of risk.
Wow, a sterile category of risk.
Yeah. The system is an automated safety layer, certainly, but it is one that fundamentally cannot read the moral direction of the sentence.
Right. It's reading the dictionary definition, but has absolutely zero concept of the lived history behind the words.
None whatsoever.
And I really want to dig into the actual mechanics of how this happens, because it's not just that the machine is, dumb. It's about how natural language processing actually functions, right?
Exactly.
The academic paper introduces these terms, interpretive collapse and context collapse, to describe this mechanical failure.
Yes. Context collapse is the engine driving this entire issue. To understand it technically, we have to look at how these moderation algorithms are actually trained.
Okay, lay it on me.
Traditionally, many of these systems use what's called a bag of words model. The algorithm literally just looks at a sentence as a container of individual words, counts how many times certain high-risk words appear, and calculates a risk score.
Like a literal bag of words. It doesn't care what order they're in.
Exactly. And Even with more modern, advanced language models that use attention mechanisms to see how words relate to each other, they are still fundamentally operating on mathematical proximity in a vector space.
Right, so it's all just math.
Yeah, they map language syntactically and statistically, not experientially.
Right, so the machine sees the word heat and statistically links it to fire or danger.
Exactly. The texts argue that the machine only reads the surface of the language. When it sees a charged word, it computes a statistical weight. It completely forgets that history plugged those specific words into real people's bodies.
Right.
It doesn't know what oppression feels like. It only knows that the word describing the oppression has a high statistical correlation with toxicity.
To put this in everyday terms, it reminds me of how easily sarcasm gets lost in text messages, but on a massive structural scale.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like, say I go to a restaurant, have a terrible meal, and text a friend, "The chicken was so dry, I literally wanted to die."
A classic text.
Exactly. A friend reads that and knows instantly it's hyperbole about bad food. But if a blunt algorithmic safety filter scans that text, it strips away the context of the restaurant. It strips away my sarcastic personality, isolates the phrase "wanted to die," and flags it as a self-harm risk. The machine misses the entirely harmless reality of the situation because it can't grasp the context.
That's a perfect parallel.
Right.
The machine identifies the target words but completely misses the event. And the author of the monologue, The Amputation of Context, uses a very vivid metaphor for this.
Oh, what is it?
They argue that a word extracted from its context is just a bone on a table.
A bone on a table. Wow.
Yeah. You can label it, you can measure its length, you can put it in a neat little categorized drawer, but you haven't met the body it came from. The author calls this process amputation with a spreadsheet.
Amputation with a spreadsheet. I mean, that is such a striking phrase.
It really sticks with you.
It highlights the bureaucratic nature of it. You're slicing away the life, the emotion, and the history of the sentence, and just keeping this sterile data point for some dashboard.
And the texts argue that this amputation is actually a form of violence against the speaker.
Violence? How so?
Because what the machine is doing is tearing the word away from the wound that gave birth to it. It tears a survivor's anger away from the injustice that made that anger sane and necessary in the first place.
Which brings up a really tough reality for the person who is actually trying to speak, right? The
Right.
creator, the survivor, the marginalized artist. The sources suggest that the insult here isn't just that a machine made an error.
Right. People make errors all the time.
Exactly. We misunderstand each other constantly.
But there's a difference in the nature of the misunderstanding. The text points out that when a human misunderstands you, they act like a confused person.
Right, they ask questions.
Yeah, they might ask you to clarify, or they might listen to your explanation and actually change their mind. But the machine doesn't misunderstand you like a person. It misunderstands you like a locked door.
A locked door.
It misunderstands you like a rigid policy. The specific phrase the monologue uses is that algorithmic moderation is often a little red warning dressed up as civilization.
A little red warning. There is no negotiating with the locked door. You can't appeal to its sense of empathy.
Because meaning doesn't live in an isolated word. Meaning lives in the entirety of the event. To understand a sentence, you have to know who is speaking, who is being defended, what power dynamic is being named.
Right, the whole picture.
Exactly. A machine built exclusively for classification cannot tell the difference between a wound and a weapon. It cannot distinguish between someone expressing hatred and someone offering testimony about the hatred they experienced.
Because it just sees the word itself.
Right. It just sees the word blood or the word gay and the algorithm snapshot.
And this leads us directly into what the sources frame as a massive moral issue. If the machine's primary directive is to demand polite, safe, sterilized language from everyone in order to maintain a frictionless platform, we have to ask a critical
A
question.
very critical question.
Who does this forced politeness actually serve? And conversely, who does it harm? Because the texts make the case that the people most harmed by offensive language are often the very ones who are most dependent on strong, forbidden language to describe what happened to them.
It's the central paradox explored across these materials. Oppressed speech, by its very nature, often has to name the exact categories and slurs that were used against it in order to dismantle them.
Right, you have to name the thing to fight it.
Exactly. As the monologue powerfully states, the forbidden words built the cage. If an automated system punishes a user for naming the cage, the author argues that the system is actively protecting the cage.
That's a profound point to consider. If the algorithmic system flags and removes the words that describe the oppression gets to stay invisible.
Precisely.
The system is essentially telling the wounded person that they need to soften the blood, to revise the wound, and to make their survival story brand safe before they are allowed to speak in public.
Brand safe survival. That's exactly it. The texts argue that this algorithmic ecosystem disproportionately rewards the smooth, the corporate, and the vague.
It punishes speech that still has the messiness of real life in it.
And perhaps the most insidious part is that the platforms present this automated caution as a form of objective neutrality.
Yes, the concept of neutrality is heavily scrutinized in these texts. The monologue asks the listener to consider neutral to whom?
Right, because neutral isn't always fair.
Exactly, because the author argues that neutral is often just the word power uses when it doesn't want to admit where it is standing. Neutrality, in the eyes of an algorithm, is just the accent of the comfortable.
And in the context of moderation, the text suggests that neutral is simply what a wound sounds like after a bureaucracy is drained it of all its actual evidence.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because as I was reading this critique of moderation, I kept thinking about the reality of the internet as we actually experience it today.
Which can be a pretty dark place.
Right. The internet is flooded with cruel, thoughtless rage, harassment, and genuine toxicity. If we remove these blunt algorithmic filters, platforms can quickly become unlivable for the very marginalized groups these texts are defending.
That's very true.
So shouldn't a platform try to filter out destructive anger to keep its spaces usable?
It's a very real concern, and it's important to note that the source material does not ignore that reality at all. The author of the monologue openly acknowledges that anger can be incredibly destructive.
Okay, so they aren't just saying all anger is good.
No, not at all. They write that anger can be stupid, cruel, and drunk on its own reflection. The argument isn't that all anger is sacred and should be unfiltered. The crucial nuance the texts provide is that anger is not automatically a moral failure.
Which is how the machine treats it.
Precisely. The machine sees heat and flags it, regardless of what's burning.
Wow, yeah.
The text states that sometimes anger is conscience arriving late but alive. A mature human intelligence will look at a fiery post and ask what the anger is actually doing in the sentence.
Right, context again.
Is it punching down at someone vulnerable, which is harassment? Or is it punching through the lies of an oppressive system, which is testimony? Is the anger trying to erase someone, or is it trying to stop an erasure?
And the automated filter simply does not ask those questions. It only calculates whether the risk-associated string of characters appeared on the screen.
That is the fundamental difference between human interpretation and machine classification. Interpretation requires understanding intent and direction. Classification just requires pattern matching.
Just matching shapes. And the real-world consequence of this reliance on classification isn't just that a few artistic slide decks or historical posts get blocked. The texts argue that this system fundamentally alters human behavior on a psychological level.
Yeah, this is where it gets scary.
It really does. It changes how we create, how we write, and ultimately how we think. To see how this happens, we need to go back to that Creative Pathways transcript because it perfectly illustrates this behavioral shift.
Yes, the second half of that transcript is incredibly revealing. After the automated system blocks the creator's historical presentation, a cinematic creative director, which appears to be another layer of AI or some guided prompt system, steps in to offer the creator a few workarounds.
This part blew my mind. So the system blocks the raw, literal history, and this AI director offers two pathways. Pathway 1 is explicitly called the filter-safe presentation.
Just the name alone is wild.
Right. To get past the algorithmic block, the system suggests swapping out the historical phrase throwing furniture with a highly symbolic sanitized phrase, shattering the silence.
Oh, wow.
And instead of the historically accurate phrase homosexual showed up with fabric and audacity, it suggests changing it to reclaiming the hide it. But this pathway 1 option, the system explicitly teaching a user to change their own words to sneak past an algorithm, brings up the core concept of anticipatory censorship.
Anticipatory censorship is arguably the most profound consequence discussed in these materials.
Yeah.
It's the psychological conditioning, where people learn to pre-censor themselves for the machine before they even type the sentence.
Right, they anticipate the block.
They learn to instinctively avoid the exact word where their trauma or their history lives, just so their post doesn't trigger a takedown.
And if you think about it, we see this everywhere right now. Think about how people actually talk on video platforms or social media today. If someone wants to discuss mental health, they won't say suicide, they'll say unalive.
Yep, the whole algo speak trend.
Exactly. They'll use asterisks in the middle of words or swap out vowels with numbers. We are all actively engaging in anticipatory censorship. We are putting what the text brilliantly calls a little corporate sweater on the truth so the dashboard feels calm.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the corporate sweater metaphor is striking because it highlights how domestic and pervasive this censorship has become.
Yeah.
The texts argue that this is a form of quiet, bureaucratic violence. Automated classification trains an entire population to speak as if they are constantly being overheard by a nervous middle management bureaucracy.
Like we're voluntarily shrinking our vocabulary to fit through a digital keyhole.
And the academic paper warns of the long-term danger here. If only flattened, sanitized speech is allowed to pass through the digital infrastructure that connects us, then flattened humanity inevitably follows.
Wow.
Art becomes padded. Testimony becomes generic. The messy reality of the human experience gets smoothed out into a comfortable, brand-friendly aesthetic.
Right.
We literally become less alive in our communication to accommodate the technical limitations of a machine.
We are making our own truths smaller so the machine doesn't blink red. So weaving all these sources together, where does this leave us? We've explored the mechanical blind spot of natural language processing, its complete inability to read context and intent.
Right.
We've examined the moral hazard of demanding polite language from marginalized groups, and we've seen the chilling psychological effect of anticipatory censorship, where we all start putting these corporate sweaters on our language. What is the ultimate demand being made by the authors of these texts?
The core thesis uniting all these materials is a demand for what they call the right to be read whole.
The right to be read whole.
Yes. It's a rejection of being parsed into data points. The demand is not to be read as a keyword, not to be read as a calculated risk score, and certainly not to be defined by the most alarming noun in your sentence.
Right.
It is the demand to be read as a complete human being with a specific history, a specific direction, and a valid moral claim.
To be read whole. I love that. The argument is that interpretation, true human understanding, must come before classification. The monologue frames it with incredible clarity. I do not need a machine to be perfect. I need it to know it is not God.
That's a powerful line.
The authors are pleading for these systems and the companies that deploy them to stop confusing their simplistic digital categories with the vast complexity of human reality.
Achieving that requires what the academic paper calls interpretive maturity. It requires systems, and more importantly, the human engineers who build and deploy those systems, to ask what a sentence is actually doing in the world, rather than just tallying up what words it contains.
Right.
It reframes content moderation from a purely technical engineering problem into a deeply philosophical and ethical one.
It really does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it brings me to a final thought for you listening. The sources we explore today make a rigorous case that our current machines lack interpretive maturity. They simply cannot read the moral direction of our words.
Right, they just don't have the capacity.
But as we spend more and more of our daily lives interacting within these platforms, adapting our language to bypass these automated filters, and eagerly putting corporate sweaters on our own truths just to ensure we are heard online, we have to ask ourselves a harder, more personal question.
Oh, this is the real question.
As we train ourselves to speak Algo speak, are we the ones losing our interpretive maturity?
Wow. Yeah, it's the ultimate risk of anticipatory censorship. The danger isn't just that the machine misunderstands us. It's that we start mimicking the very machines that misunderstand us.
Exactly. When you scroll through a feed and see a post from a friend or even a stranger, do you take the time to read their history, to understand their wound, to find their direction? Or do you find yourself just scanning their words for the alarming noun, quickly categorizing them into a neat little mental drawer and scrolling past?
It's so easy to just keep scrolling.
It really is. It is something to really think about the next time you find yourself staring at a screen, rewriting your own reality just to make an algorithm comfortable. Keep questioning the digital systems around you, demand interpretive maturity, and whatever you do, never let your own context be amputated. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.